Hello, and welcome to another episode of Lost in Suikoden Translation. Today, we're taking a closer look at the localization of Suikoden V and examining how, at times, it reads more like fanfiction than a faithful translation. As always, this series contains spoilers, so without further ado, let's get started. The Suikoden series has long been known for its subpar translations, though some entries hide it better than others. Suikoden II is often highlighted for its numerous typos, mistranslations, and non sequiturs, but these issues can generally be chalked up to simple mistakes or rushed production. However, the PlayStation 2 titles present a different set of challenges, with Suikoden V standing out for the sheer number of changes made to the script during localization. While there are certainly odd translation choices to discuss, like how Georg's name is pronounced George in cutscenes, the Dusk Rune being renamed the Twilight Rune despite the change making little contextual sense, or Marino's name inexplicably becoming Marina, these are relatively minor changes in the grand scheme of things. What we're focusing on today are specific scenes in the game where the English localization strays significantly from the original Japanese script. While we obviously can't cover the entire game, the examples we'll explore should illustrate the larger issues with Suikoden V's localization. If you've only played the English version of Suikoden V, you'd be forgiven for believing that Lucretia and Lele are in a romantic relationship. Several scenes heavily imply this, with one even suggesting that Lucretia may have been involved with Cathari in the past. Unfortunately, this interpretation seems to have been entirely fabricated by the localizers. In the original Japanese script, their relationship is no different from, say, Max and Sancho or Lepant and Giovanni, a straightforward dynamic between a lord and their attendant. It appears the localizers interpreted Lucretia and Lele's relationship as romantic and decided to make their interpretation canon within the game. However, the issue is that there's not much in the original text to support such a reading. For example, in the scene before the final battle, Lele suggests they spend some time together in English when Lucretia says they should call it a day. In the Japanese version, her response is a simple yes. There's no hidden meaning to interpret. This implication was entirely made up. Similarly, Cathari seems to hint in the English version that she and Lucretia might be more than friends, or that Lucretia wishes they were, with the added line, maybe more? However, in Japanese, Cathari merely mocks Lucretia, asking if she'd prefer her to act like a stereotypical girly girl, and this exchange contains no romantic subtext. To accommodate this invented narrative, the localizers change the line where Cathari makes clear she has no interest even hugging Lucretia to have her ask for a favor instead, a favor that is never clarified or mentioned again in the game. The original script provides no substantive evidence to suggest anything beyond a professional dynamic between Lucretia and Lele, let alone romantic ties to Cathari. When Roy impersonates the prince during Suikoden V, he adopts a manner of speech that is wildly exaggerated and unnatural. This is especially evident during the New Queen's campaign, where he encounters Alenia, who, despite having spent considerable time around the prince and the royal family, doesn't immediately realize that Roy isn't the real prince. In Japanese, this scene plays out quite differently, and Roy doesn't speak in an overly formal or archaic manner, he simply talks normally. While he does act foolish when he's alone with Xerace, even then, there's no prompt from her to behave more regally. Xerace merely comments that the resemblance between Roy and the prince ends at their physical appearance. The exaggerated portrayal in the English localization appears to have been added purely for comedic effect. However, this change undermines the believability of the scene. Alenia's failure to notice anything amiss only makes sense if she's portrayed as a complete idiot, something that's inconsistent with her character. By making Roy's behavior so unnatural, the localizers created a moment that, while potentially funny, comes across as nonsensical in context. Viki is a recurring character in the series, appearing in every main installment and some of the side games. She's consistently portrayed as a ditzy, absent-minded individual who inadvertently teleports herself across the world and through time without even realizing it. However, in Suikoden V, there are several moments where Viki demonstrates surprising clarity. This has led some fans to speculate that this version of Viki might be from an earlier point in her timeline. Unfortunately, this is not the case in the original version. The localizers simply decided to insert additional jokes into her dialogue, altering the tone of her character. For instance, when you first meet her, she teleports you to Raftfleet. In English, she makes odd comments about you or your companions, possibly losing body parts during the teleportation process, a concept that has never been mentioned elsewhere in the series before. In Japanese, she simply expresses relief that she managed to send you to the correct location. Another notable example comes after a major defeat, where Viki offers to teleport the prince to a magical place far away where he can forget his troubles. She quickly catches herself and pretends she didn't say anything, implying that her ditziness might be an act. However, this is entirely an invention of the localization. In Japanese, she merely offers to take the prince to a faraway land where no one knows him, suggesting escape as an option. She then realizes she shouldn't be encouraging him to run away, apologizes, and advises him to rest. These changes in the English localization create a version of Viki that feels more self-aware and calculated than her original portrayal. While the added humor might appeal to some players, it misrepresents her character and undermines her trademark obliviousness. When returning to Sol Felina after the Sacred Games, if you visit the rune shop while Lim is in your party, there's an optional scene involving Jeane where Lim grows increasingly flustered and accuses Jeane of being a hussy. However, this exchange doesn't exist in the Japanese version. While Lim is initially taken aback by Jeane's revealing attire, Jeane explains that her clothing is normal where she's from. Rather than becoming flustered or accusatory, Lim is intrigued and no word is ever used that even comes close to hussy. This scene was rewritten in the English localization for comedic effect. Whether or not the humor works for you is a matter of personal taste, but it highlights the lack of reverence the localizers had for the original script. It's also worth noting that this altered conversation is exclusive to the English version. Other European localizations remain much closer to the original Japanese dialogue. When Subala is introduced, there's some initial confusion about her gender. The prince can ask Lune if Subala is her boyfriend, to which she'll reply that, while it might be hard to tell, Subala is a girl, she just got hit in the face with an ugly stick. In the Japanese version, however, there's no mention of Subala being ugly. Lune simply describes her as a tomboy. She's just mistaken for a man because she's flat and talks crudely. The English localization exaggerates the dialogue, introducing the concept of the ugly stick for comedic effect. While this embellishment is mostly harmless, the localization doesn't stop there. Throughout the rest of the game, Lune repeatedly calls Subala ugly in the English version, something that doesn't happen in Japanese. Subala's looks are not really mentioned again after her introduction in the Japanese script. Instead, Lune is mostly concerned about why Subala became such a mean person. The repeated jabs in the English localization makes Lune come across as unnecessarily mean-spirited, which feels out of character for her when it's actually Subala that is supposed to be foul-mouthed and picking fights with Lune. There's also the matter of Subala's name. In Japanese, her name is Subaru, a name that, while more commonly used for boys, can also be given to girls. It's another subtle nod to her tomboyish nature, but for reasons unknown, the localizers changed her name to Subala. This isn't the only puzzling name change in Suikoden V, though. For instance, like I mentioned at the start of the video, Marina is actually Merino in Japanese. But unlike Subaru, we know why this name was changed. Years ago, the localizers of Suikoden V participated in the forums on their star, a predecessor to Gensopedia. Although there's no longer a record of those interactions, one of the localizers claimed they changed Merino to Marina because there are no female names ending in with O in the West. Of course, this reasoning is patently untrue, and would raise some questions about Cleo from the original Suikoden if such a rule actually existed. As for why Subaru became Subala, your guess is as good as mine. Perhaps the localizers consulted an astrological chart or flipped a coin. Either explanation makes about as much sense as the reasoning behind the Marina change. And with that, we've reached the end of this episode of Lost in Suikoden Translation. As I mentioned earlier, these are just a few examples illustrating the issues with Suikoden V's localization. There are plenty more we could explore, so let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in revisiting this topic in the future. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next time.